for 1,725 wire transfers, nearly $1.1 billion, and a locked cabinet inside the Treasury that holds files no one in power wants the public to see. Imagine the scale of criminal networks it would take to move that kind of money in and out of just one account. Imagine the names that could be revealed if those transactions were ever traced. Yet instead of answers, instead of justice, the American people are handed silence, excuses, and delay. And that silence is exactly why Senator Ron Wyden stood on the Senate floor and demanded the truth be released.
From Oregon.
Mr. President, Donald Trump has made some far-fetched statements over the last few months, but a stunner in the last few days was his claim that the Jeffrey Epstein matter was a hoax and a scam. Here is why the president is wrong. The figure at the center of this story was an ultra-rich, well-connected sex trafficker. He was a serial rapist of women and young girls. And for some reason, the Trump administration, that claimed they'd be the most transparent administration ever, turned on a dime. The president had run on a campaign with a promise to expose the Epstein files. Now he and the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, say, nope, nothing to investigate. When it comes to Epstein and sex trafficking, all these claims are just ludicrous. I want the American people to know that that's wrong. If you want to know why, just look at the latest report from our investigators that was discussed in the New York Times this morning. Now, somewhere in the Treasury Department, Mr. President, locked away in a cabinet drawer, is a big Epstein file that's full of actionable information. Follow the money details about his financing and operations that await investigation. Last year, the Biden administration allowed our investigators to look at portions of the file. We did that at the Treasury building. Here is what it says. Treasury's Epstein file details, Mr. President, 4,725 wire transfers. Let me repeat that. 4,725 wire transfers, adding up to nearly $1.1 billion flowing in and out of just one of Mr. Epstein's bank accounts. If you ask me, that is more than 4,000 potential lines of investigation right there. Hundreds of millions more flowed through other accounts. That's even a lot more to investigate. The file shows that Mr. Epstein used multiple Russian banks, which are now under sanctions, to process payments related to sex trafficking. A lot of the women and girls he targeted came from Russia, Belarus, Turkey, and elsewhere. One shudders to think about the kinds of people who must have been involved in trafficking these women and young girls out of those companies and into the Epstein web of abuse. Again, these are all potential leads, Mr. President, the Department of Justice ought to be digging into. This is about years and years of international sex trafficking. None of this is a hoax. None of it is a scam. And I'd like to say I consider it insulting to the intelligence of the American people for the Trump administration to simply say there is nothing to investigate here. Now, when the Trump administration came in with a lot of fanfare about transparency and openness, I said, I'm going to follow up on that. So I wrote to the Attorney General, Ms. Bondi, Treasury Secretary Bessent, FBI Director Patel, and I asked them all to produce the Epstein file to the Senate Finance Committee so it could be reviewed. In fact, I've made that request multiple times. The Trump commitment to transparency based on the response didn't mean a whole lot because they just refused. Here's what one Treasury official wrote back to me. I'll quote here. The Department of Treasury has previously made documents available relating to the matter in response to your inquiries. Accordingly, we understand that you have the information you seek from the Treasury related to this request. We thank you for your attention to this important issue. Mr. President, for anybody who's familiar with how these discussions go in Washington, D.C., what I just read was code for the bureaucracy saying, you're asking for information, go pound sand. The Trump administration may be trying to close the books on the Epstein sex trafficking, but I want it understood as a senior member of the Senate Finance Committee, where we spend a lot of time looking at where substantial sums of money are going, particularly if they may be promoting wrongdoing and helping to evade taxes. We are going to stay on this fight to hold the wealthy individuals accountable for the harm that they clearly were involved in injuring the young women and others in this sex trafficking. So I'm going to have more follow-up for Attorney General Bondi very quickly. As for today, Mr. President, if she doesn't want to do the investigating, doesn't want the DOJ to do it, let me just restate my original demand. Have that Treasury information given to the Senate Finance Committee and have us on a bipartisan basis do our work. That's what we do in important investigations. If the Trump people believe they need additional authority to carry out the requests that I make again this afternoon, let me offer to help them write the bill myself. The idea that there is nothing more to investigate, not when you have 4,000 wire transfers, many of them associated with the possibility of wrongdoing and sex traffic promoting. The idea that you have that and there's nothing to investigate when it comes to the Epstein sex trafficking operation is ridiculous. Pam Bondi was the Attorney General in the state of Florida, where a lot of the Epstein crimes were committed. The Attorney General ought to know better, of all people. Mr. President, I can't begin to understand the President's handling of this or why he thinks this is just going to go away. But I'm here to say that our investigators have spent 3 full years looking into this. And the reason why is because we feel so strongly about the horror of sex trafficking and our commitment to root it out. The President of the Senate is new to this body, but I'm sure he's dealt with these issues before. You can't have a much bigger horror in front of you than sex trafficking abuse. So we're talking about real evil done to women and girls by Jeffrey Epstein. And Mr. President, nobody gets to sweep that under the rug. I yield the floor.
Because what's buried in that cabinet could change everything we know about Jeffrey Epstein's financial empire. The shocking part is that this isn't rumor or speculation. It's documented fact. The Treasury's own records show wire transfers flowing in and out like an unstoppable river, thousands upon thousands of them. Nearly $1.1 billion shuffled across borders, routed through accounts tied to institutions already flagged for corruption and international criminal activity. Those transactions are more than just numbers on a page. They are potential leads, trails of evidence that could uncover exactly who helped enable Epstein's global network. And yet, the Department of Justice refuses to act. What makes this even more infuriating is how those in charge of transparency turned their backs on it the moment real accountability was within reach. The campaign promises about exposing the Epstein files were loud and clear, but once in office, that tune changed overnight. Suddenly, the message became, nothing to investigate, nothing to see here. And the person tasked with carrying out that mission of justice, the Attorney General, looked away. Pam Bondi, who knows all too well the depths of Epstein's crimes in Florida, chose silence over action. At the very moment the nation needed leadership, we got stonewalling. And here's where the story grows darker. The Treasury file reveals that Epstein used multiple Russian banks, many of which are now under sanctions for ties to corruption and security threats. Think about that. A convicted trafficker with international reach, shuffling hundreds of millions through banks linked to hostile foreign powers. It wasn't just money bouncing from one account to another. It was money crossing borders, moving through institutions already flagged as compromised. At the same time, victims from Russia, Belarus, and Turkey were surfacing in his trafficking cases. The overlap is impossible to ignore. This wasn't the work of one man alone. This points to a transnational operation, enabled not just by Epstein's wealth, but by systems designed to look the other way. And when Senator Wyden demanded answers, the response from Treasury wasn't just insulting, it was coded dismissal. They wrote back with bureaucratic language that essentially told him to stop asking questions. You already have the documents you need. In other words, go pound sand. Picture this: a sitting senator on the Finance Committee whose entire job is to oversee financial integrity and protect the public from corruption, being brushed off like an annoyance. That's not transparency. That's obstruction. And the refusal to investigate isn't passive incompetence. It looks deliberate. Think about the implications of ignoring more than 4,000 separate wire transfers. Each transfer is a potential lead, a thread that could unravel networks of enablers, financiers, or collaborators. Yet the Justice Department, the Treasury, and the nation's top legal officials all decided to sit on their hands. What does that say to the survivors of trafficking? What does it say to the American people who were promised accountability? The message couldn't be clearer. For some, justice is optional. If you're powerful enough, connected enough, or wealthy enough, the system bends to protect you. And that message is as dangerous as the crimes themselves. But not everyone is willing to accept silence as the final word. Senator Wyden made it clear on the Senate floor that this fight isn't over. He demanded the full release of the Epstein financial file. Every page, not just summaries, not sanitized talking points, but the real data. He reminded the chamber that this is exactly what the Finance Committee was built to do, to trace money, to expose fraud, and to hold those who manipulate the system accountable. And he wasn't subtle about it. He said that if the Justice Department won't act, he'll help draft the legislation himself to make sure Congress does. That's how serious the stakes are. And make no mistake, the stakes go far beyond one man's crimes. This is about the bigger picture, the way power protects itself. Epstein was not some lone operator moving money in a vacuum. The sheer scale of his financial activity points to a network, one that only makes sense if others in positions of power were involved. And when you look at the Treasury file, you're not just looking at Epstein's money, you're looking at a map of connections. Every transfer is a possible thread leading back to someone who helped, someone who protected, or someone who profited. This is why "follow the money" isn't just a slogan. It's a method of uncovering truth. History shows us that massive criminal operations rarely survive without financial trails. Whether it's organized crime, corporate fraud, or trafficking networks, the money always leaves a footprint. And the footprint here is staggering. $1.1 billion flowing in and out of just one account. Multiply that across his entire financial portfolio, and you're not looking at the crimes of one predator. You're staring at the machinery of an empire. And here's where the real danger lies. If government agencies refuse to investigate even when confronted with undeniable numbers, it means accountability isn't just delayed, it's being buried. That refusal to act turns bureaucratic silence into complicity. It transforms offices meant to protect justice into shields for the powerful. And for survivors of trafficking, That betrayal cuts deeper than the crimes themselves, because it tells them that the fight for justice ends not in a courtroom, but in a filing cabinet collecting dust. Why is this being buried? Who benefits from letting that file remain locked away? These are the questions that keep resurfacing. And every time silence is the answer, suspicion grows. It's not just about the crimes of Epstein anymore. It's about what our leaders are willing to hide and why. The lack of action doesn't erase the crimes. It only raises new questions about who else is implicated. Senator Wyden knows this, which is why he refuses to step aside. He framed it plainly. If the Treasury and DOJ won't do their jobs, then Congress must. And he's right, because every day that file sits locked away, the truth remains hidden not just from survivors, but from the entire country. And the longer it stays hidden, the harder it becomes to ever uncover. This story is no longer about speculation. It's about documented transfers, verifiable amounts, and confirmed international links. It's about institutions that promised openness, only to retreat into secrecy when accountability knocked on the door. And above all, it's about whether the American people will accept silence or demand that the truth finally come to light. The real question isn't whether there's something left to investigate. The evidence speaks for itself. The question is whether anyone in power is willing to pursue it. Will we see a government that confronts the horror of trafficking with honesty, or will we watch another cover-up play out in slow motion? That choice is being made right now, and history will remember who chose to hide and who chose to fight. What Senator Wyden put on the record is a challenge not just to the DOJ and Treasury, but to all of us. Because transparency isn't optional in a democracy. Accountability isn't optional in a society that claims to value justice. And when leaders refuse to act, the responsibility shifts to the people to demand better. Let's be absolutely clear. This isn't only about Jeffrey Epstein. It's about a system that allowed him to thrive, a network that shielded him, and a government that now seems more interested in protecting reputations than protecting victims. The numbers don't lie. The file exists. The transfers happened. And every delay in confronting that reality is another blow to justice. If this alarms you, and it should, don't let this story fade into the background noise. The only way truth comes out is if people demand it. That means sharing this story, speaking out, and holding those in power accountable. If you're watching this, do your part. Hit the like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss an update. Most importantly, drop a comment below and tell Congress it's time to release the Epstein financial files. Because until that file is unlocked and exposed to the public, the truth will remain hidden, and the fight for justice will remain unfinished.